Welcome back, and today we have another round of Broadway grosses, so let's get into it. Up first, we have Juliet, and that went from 93% capacity to 90% capacity, and 1,122,842 to 957,958, which again is a pretty significant drop, a $164,000 drop, and again, this musical has been pretty inconsistent with its grosses, I mean, you think it's hitting 1 million, and then it's a 900. It's not closing, it's doing good, but it's definitely an oddity, for sure. This normally doesn't happen with these kind of musicals, so it is interesting, but nothing to be concerned about. We have A Beautiful Noise, and that went from 78% to 66%, and $1 million to 874,417. Again, not in any big trouble, especially as it has done very well with its new schedule, so I do not think it will close anytime soon, and 874K is perfectly fine for pretty much any musical. Gutenberg, the musical, Back to the Future went from 92% to 88%, and 1,257,898 to $1 million, so it's also doing fine. Gutenberg, the musical, went from 92% to 88%, and 932K to 904K. And again, Gutenberg is doing just solid numbers. It doesn't need to make $1 million every week. It doesn't even need to make a 900,000 a week. So it is doing phenomenally well for the kind of show that it is, and it is a limited engagement, so it doesn't need to make millions of dollars. And still, they're doing very solid numbers. And it looks like Steam definitely has picked up for Gutenberg, and people are now seeing it, which is really nice, even though I wasn't the biggest fan of it. Still thought it was good though. Then we get on to poor old Hadestown, and again, I don't know how this thing is still not announced a closing yet. It went from 680K to 598K, and 95% to 90%. Again, these are pretty terrible numbers. I know that Jordan Fisher is coming on, but I honestly don't think he'll help that much, because we saw what his presence did for David Hansen sales, and that was nothing. So I predict that this will close in 2024. It has to. I mean, maybe they want to have Larkin, you know what I'm trying to say, and Hadestown across the street, and like a synergy of, a female director having two musicals on Broadway and everything. But again, it's just losing money at the seams, and it's a musical that needs to be put out of its misery and announced a closing. This thing is on its deathbed. It is dying a slow but painful death. Hamilton went from 101% to 99%, and 1,801,365 to 1,767,882. Harmony went from 82% to 77%, and 491K to 519K. Not a great start for Harmony. Again, I think this will have a run similar to a Shocked, where it doesn't do that well and that amazing. I don't even know if it will make it to the Tonys. I know it's only the first 2 weeks of previews, but when most musicals start off like this, they kind of don't become blockbuster hits, and they don't go into the 9s and the 8s, which is what this kind of show needs. I think its ceiling is probably like 600 and 700, which isn't enough. But I could see it sticking around until the Tony Awards time, and it doesn't seem like the most expensive musical, but again, it's off to a pretty mess start overall. Typically, you want to see a show start off at lowest 500,000, in its first week, right? And then next week it goes to 6 or 7. And so starting off with 4s and 5s isn't great. Kind of like Here Lies Love, which again started off pretty similar, and I said, well, maybe it will get there, and it didn't get there. So Here Lies Love went from 79% to 83%, and 690K to 664K. And again, I think at this point, it's only a matter of time until they announce a closing. It's just done very poorly, and it's not making the money it needs to. I mean, 6s, 5s, 4s, it's not going to cut it. Even 7 doesn't cut it. This musical needs to do 800K plus, or 850K plus a week in order to survive. I know that, on the Broadway Journal, I think they said they need to make at least 800,000 a week, but I think that probably the creatives took out their royalties, and it was probably more than that. But yeah, it's definitely gonna announce a closing this month. I predict it. I don't see how it survives. It's just bleeding money at this point, and it's nothing's worked. The marketing tactics that they've used, it just hasn't worked. Kimberly Akimbo went from 91% to 84%, and 702K to 599K, and that is an incredible 103K drop. Again, I think this will also close pretty soon. I know last week it went back to the 7s, but that seemed more like a fluke, and it seems like it's more consistently doing 4s and 5s, and they've lost so much money over previews and stuff, and the Tony Awards didn't help it. So unfortunately, Kimberly Akimbo and Here Lies Love are the next two musicals to close, and I definitely think Here Lies Love will be doing it any day now, and Akimbo might hold on, but I mean, really, I don't know how much longer they can. Merrily We Roll Along is continuing to make big box office, 100% capacity, 1,820,753 last week to this week's 1,840,835. I mean, this musical is making more money than Hamilton, and that's insane. That this flop of a musical that played for 16 performances is now one of the best-selling shows. It's outselling Hamilton, guys. Like, it's incredible. Moulin Rouge went from 97% to 94%, and 1,252,743 to 1,118,807. A pretty sizable drop, but still doing quite solid business. Shocked went from 87% to 79%, or 78%, and 771K to 643K, even though that show's closing, still a big drop. 6 went from 94% to 87%, and 937K to 798K, for another over $100,000 drop. Some Like It Hot went from 74% to 66%, and another 100K plus drop, going from 905K to 738K, which is pretty bad. But again, Shocked and Some Like It Hot at closing. And then Sweeney went from 98% to 94%, and 1,710,928 to 1,583,312, for another 100K plus drop. So overall, this was a pretty poor week for a lot of musicals. And not a great start for Harmony, but again, I think Here Lies Love, Hadestown, and Kimberly Akimbo, these three musicals will announce a closing any day now. I think Hadestown will probably hold on until 2024, but I think it's just going to end on a whimper instead of a strong note. But yeah, Hadestown, Here Lies Love, and Kimberly Akimbo, any day now, one of these musicals makes an announcement of closing. I think it's going to be Here Lies Love, unfortunately. But that is the business, and that is Broadway box office. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.